safer in Saudi Arabia? That's what son-in-law and former advisor to ex-President Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, said about the state of the Jewish community in America, particularly on college campuses. Here's how he put it on Fox News. Let's watch.
Yeah, so it was a very interesting time to be over there, and I've been there many times before. One of the ironies is that as an American Jew, you're safer in Saudi Arabia right now than you are on a college campus like Columbia University. I spoke at the conference. They allowed me to speak freely.
Kushner was there on business and, per reporting in The Hill, sensed Saudi officials felt, quote, big disgust by the Hamas attacks. Now, his comments come as a flurry of pro-Palestinian sentiment and an escalation of aggression against Jewish students sweeping college campuses here in the United States. This weekend, law enforcement's presence increased at Cornell University's campus after an anti-Jewish post was made on a student forum reading, quote, Allahu Akbar, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, glory to Hamas, liberation by any means necessary, unquote. The poster signed, Kill Jews.
Students at Cornell were also issued a stark warning to avoid the kosher hall. The message sent by Cornell Hillel notified students, staff, and faculty that it is aware of the threats being made against the building 104 West, where the dining hall is located. And it advised people to avoid using it out of, quote, an abundance of caution. Another Cornell alum posted several screenshots of disturbing messages directed at the Jewish community, urging the slitting of Jewish people's throats, the killing of Jewish women, among other violent messages. So there are a lot of messages being posted here. I'm curious as to what they mean by an abundance of caution. What did those threats look like? I'm curious why Jared Kushner said that. We haven't had anyone who is Jewish in the United States killed as a result of the escalation of the conflict. A 6-year-old Muslim boy, however, was killed in Chicago. I think, tensions are really high, and I don't want to over-highlight, the threats to the Jewish community without highlighting also the threats to the Muslim community. I just don't think it's the time or place for everyday American citizens to be hashing this issue out amongst themselves. I don't think it's the place of Ron DeSantis to saying that, college students who support the Palestinians are not allowed to meet in groups and talk. You can't have a group on a college campus. This is directly a free speech violation. I'm not surprised it's coming from DeSantis because I think we knew his support of free speech was hypocritic at best. And so the way that he's shutting down these groups does not surprise me, but it's really unfortunate what's happening at college campuses, how it's become so central in mainstream press. These are young kids figuring out the world. Perhaps we should stick to talking about the adults and focus our concerns there.
Look, I wrote an article for Reason about how Ron DeSantis' order with respect to the Palestinian student groups and how I agree with you that I think that violates the First Amendment. They have every right to hold odious views and to be active on them. But you certainly don't have a right, whoever's doing it, to threaten Jewish students and Jewish institutions. And look, I find it a bit rich because for years, left-wing groups, including the Anti-Defamation League, have claimed that there's escalating hateful rhetoric and hate crimes and hate speech against Jewish people and other groups, directly attributing it, these left-wing groups did, to Donald Trump and his rhetoric, saying that the state of fear for Jewish people because of the right is off the charts and has increased dramatically. And I've had to confront those claims. People on the right have had to confront those claims for years. Now we have a situation where left-wing Palestinian activists or Islamic activists on college campuses are threatening Jewish students, calling Jewish people rats, calling for violence against them, projecting hateful rhetoric on their buildings. They have to close. I mean, there's like in this moment, there is off the charts. There is an increase, I think, certainly of this kind of unacceptable rhetoric, and it's coming from Palestinian sympathetic people. It's coming from the left, and now we're supposed to say, actually, just discount it. It should just be discounted. That doesn't seem fair at all to me, to the people who've been smeared as anti-Semitic for just supporting Donald Trump.
I don't think it should be discounted. I definitely don't think Ron DeSantis should be shutting down groups that are expressing their political opinion on college campuses. But I think in this case, in the case of the threats to the dining hall, it would make sense to me for Cornell to increase the security there to, ensure the students that this is not a war that will be fought on Cornell campus and that they're safe. They're much safer in Cornell than they absolutely would be in the Gaza Strip. That, the threats that have been made against them being compared to the Nazi sentiments within Donald Trump's party, definitely not the same thing. But you do have people flying Make America Great Again flags in the same rallies they're flying, the Nazi swastika flag. So I don't think it's fair to say that, these are the same things. There is definitely anti-Semitism on the left. There's anti-Semitism on the right. It is a problem. But I think it's up to the university to make people feel safe and to focus a lot of their statements on the anti-Semitism. I would wonder if there's a lot Islamophobia on the campus of Cornell as well. What are they doing about that? Universities need a plan so that students can peacefully express their political opinions without creating grounds for Islamophobia and anti-Semitism to grow. And that's a challenge that universities have had to face for quite some time. And so it's really up to Cornell to decide what to do next. I really hope that the government doesn't see fit that they need to litigate the situations on these college campuses in the way that Ron DeSantis has.
I saw Senator Bernie Sanders post on Twitter, on X, a perfectly, to my mind, benign statement. I'll read it to you. Today, we remember and mourn for the victims lost 5 years ago in the devastating massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue. We must remain committed to fighting all forms of bigotry, anti-Semitism, intolerance, racism, and xenophobia. Who could disagree with that statement, right? Well, it looks like to me a lot of people on the left disagree with it because the comments is just for people who describe themselves as former supporters of Bernie Sanders who are so incensed by the comment coming at this time. How is that not, what you're saying it's wrong to recognize that 5 years ago there were victims of anti-Semitism in that attack? I don't even get what's being said, but it looks to me like people on the left who used to be Sanders supporters endorsing, I guess, like the collective guilt of the Jewish people because of their frustration with what Israel is doing. It's just gross to me. I think you're right that there is certainly undeniably anti-Semitism on the left and on the right, and the mainstream media has treated this in a very one-sided direction for a long time, by only treating it as if it's a serious issue on the right.
Yeah, I think a lot of the former Sanders supporters, it can be a yes-and situation. It can be yes, the killing at the synagogue was disgusting, and we remember the tragedy. But let's also remember that Senator Sanders, there's also a huge carpet bombing campaign going on in Gaza today, and you have not called for a ceasefire. You have not called the ending of the expansion of the occupation by Israel. I think a lot of people feel a sense of urgency of the violence that's happening today, of the violence that happened over the weekend, of the many Palestinians that were civilians that were killed by the bombs that were dropped on them when they had no internet to call to the world and tell the world what was going on. They were left in complete blackout. And Israel is who controls their electricity. It's who controls their water in northern Gaza. They have put a blockade on them, but they have also controlled their air and their land exit or their water exits, the borders, aside from one border, which is controlled by Egypt. Israel controls 3 out of the 4 borders. It's been quite some time that they've controlled what happens within Gaza. And that's allowed them today to commit atrocities that they don't have to be held accountable for because people don't have access to electricity and Wi-Fi and cellular service to document them. So I think I understand the feeling of a sense of urgency of Senator Sanders. Why are you not calling for peace for the violence that's happening today and remembering the violence that happened yesterday? I think he can do both. And I think they're upset that he didn't do both and chose to do one but not the other.
Yeah, I think making Jewish students feel unsafe because you disagree with the policies of the Israeli government is evil, just as making random Muslim people feel unsafe because of the actions of the terrorist group Hamas. That bad, violent organizations and governments, too, that do all sorts of bad things want to do collective punishment, want to treat all people as members of some group and everyone responsible for every bad thing the group does. And it's on everyone to look beyond that very narrow and limited and illiberal way of thinking. And there's a activist contingent that is just, I think, unwilling to do that in this moment.
Yeah, I think that's true, that there are a lot of people that are blinded, by the violence, by rage, by, being upset that their family is being killed. I think human beings don't think clearly when they're in that state of mind, if they have family members in Gaza. And so I think the proper way forward here is that we approach sort of what the ANC in South Africa and Desmond Tutu, along with Nelson Mandela and their group that were fighting for freedom for so long, once they reached the point where they gained the support of the international community, once many people were paying attention to the atrocities that were being committed in apartheid South Africa, then they said, okay, we need to find a way to coexist. And I think a lot of people are not hopeful, based on all of Netanyahu's sentiments and actions, that he will ever agree to that. We had Jimmy Carter in 2013 say that Hamas is in a place where they would like peace, where they would both like to live in their homeland, where a lot of Palestinian people were pushed out of in 1948 in the Nakba, that they would like to return and coexist with Israelis. And Jimmy Carter said that in his negotiations, Netanyahu was not supportive of that. So we've known this for a decade. So I think a lot of people would like to have a path forward for peace. And I think a lot of people are blinded by the violence right now, and a lot of people are angry, and many people are rightfully angry because of the violence that's happened to their families and their communities. But I do think that the way forward is liberation and then peace. But there needs to be a regime in Israel, and the U.S. can influence this, that also supports peace and liberation.
But there needs to be a regime in Gaza as well, right? I mean, Hamas doesn't want peace with Israel. They just attacked and abducted a number of Israelis, right? They just kicked off a new front in the conflict. So I wish Israel had been. We've criticized Israel's policies on the show a number of times. There's been credible evidence for the mistakes Netanyahu specifically has made that have actually emboldened Hamas. But I mean, it's clear what Hamas's goals, right? It's not peaceful coexistence with Israel. There's no evidence of that.
Well, Israel's made it impossible for Gaza to establish a government, for the West Bank to have a functioning government. When you have the occupation and the control of your borders by another country, you're not allowed to be a sovereign nation. The Palestinians don't have a country. They can't have a government. They're not even allowed to have a military. So I think it's kind of absurd to assume that it's the Gazans' fault, it's the Palestinians' fault, it's the people living in the West Bank's fault that they don't have a government to negotiate for peace. That right has been denied to them by Israel. They're not allowed to.
I did not say it was their fault. I'm not blaming them. They're victims just as much of this. But the group that's active, the government they have, it's not a legitimate government. It's one they selected before most of the people there were even born. But I'm just saying that group does not want to live in peace, and that makes this process very difficult.
It sounds like Jimmy Carter believed Hamas wanted to live in peace. If you have someone who's the president of the United States saying that, he met and spoke with Hamas back in 2013, just 5 years or so after they were elected, 6 years after they were elected, that they wanted peace, that they were ready to negotiate with Israel. And Jimmy Carter said, well, it sounds like Netanyahu wants a one-state solution. He wants to absolve Palestine. This is not coming from a radical living outside of Israel, living in Gaza. This is not coming from Hamas. This is coming from Jimmy Carter. And so I really do believe that Netanyahu is the aggressor in this situation. They continue to take land and occupy Palestine. And their aggression is why there's not peace in the region. And I think maybe Netanyahu doesn't need the support of the United States if we're going to have a peaceful way forward. And the United States really needs to think critically of their role in this, because they're putting all of us in jeopardy by supporting a regime that by 800 scholars of international law has defined as committing a genocide right now. The United States being supportive and complicit in this is a security risk, I think, for everyone at home if they decide to retaliate.
Well, that part I agree with. The rest I disagree, but that's why we have a little debate show here. More Rising right after this.